The Hunter's Shadow. Admiral Mix Thorn stood motionless before the vast observation window of the Imperial command vessel Eternal Dawn, his iridescent scales reflecting the dim starlight. The massive ship's bridge hummed with the quiet efficiency of the Empire's finest crew, but Thorn's attention remained fixed on the holographic display floating before him. Something was wrong with the numbers. "Run the sensor sweep again," he ordered, his deep voice carrying the weight of 3 centuries of military command. Full spectrum analysis. First Officer Vex's crystalline appendages flickered with acknowledgement as she initiated another scan. The Arcanian Empire had conquered 12 star systems with their superior technology, and in all that time, their sensors had never failed them. Until now. "Admiral." Vex's voice carried an unusual tremor, confirmation of previous readings. "The anomaly remains consistent with initial scans. 0 energy signature, 0 gravitational distortion, 0 thermal output. Yet, it's there." Thorn's primary hearts quickened their rhythm as he studied the visual feed. Against the backdrop of distant stars hung what appeared to be a vessel of some kind. Its hull was an absolute black that seemed to drink in the light around it, its form barely discernible even to the Arcanians' advanced optical processors. "Magnification maximum," he commanded. The holographic display shifted, bringing the mysterious object into closer view. Its design defied conventional shipbuilding principles. No visible engine ports, no weapon systems, no communication arrays. It was as if someone had carved a ship-shaped hole in space itself. "Historical database comparison," Thorn queried, though he already suspected the answer. "No matches, Admiral," Vex confirmed. "The design architecture doesn't correlate with any known spacefaring species in our records, including those we've assimilated." Thorn's secondary heart joined the first in its accelerated rhythm. The Arcanian Empire had encountered and conquered every advanced civilization in this sector of the galaxy. Their technological superiority was absolute, their military might unquestioned. Yet here floated something that by all rights shouldn't exist, a ship that their most sophisticated sensors couldn't properly detect. "Launch probe drones," he ordered after a moment's consideration. "Standard first contact protocol." As the automated probes detached from the Eternal Dawn's launch bays, Thorn reflected on the Empire's history of expansion. Every new species they'd encountered had followed a predictable pattern of technological development. Energy weapons, faster than light travel, artificial gravity, all based on the same fundamental principles of physics. But this was different. The probes approached the mysterious vessel, their sensors broadcasting the standard greeting package, a simple message of peace encoded in universal mathematical constants. Thorn watched their approach on the tactical display, his scales rippling with unease as the drones drew closer to their target. Then something impossible happened. The probes didn't crash. They didn't explode. They didn't even stop functioning. They simply ceased to exist the moment they crossed an invisible boundary around the dark vessel. No debris, no energy discharge, no distortion in spacetime. They were there, and then they weren't. "Analysis," Thorn barked, all 3 of his hearts now pounding in alarm. "Unable to compute, Admiral," Vex responded, her crystalline appendages flickering rapidly with distress. The probes didn't register any form of attack or malfunction. According to our sensors, they simply stopped being part of reality. A murmur of unease rippled through the bridge crew. In 3 centuries of Imperial expansion, nothing like this had ever been recorded. Thorn felt the weight of command pressing down on him like a neutron star's gravity. Whatever this vessel was, whoever had built it, they wielded technology that operated on principles the Arcanians couldn't even detect, let alone understand. "Deploy the battle fleet," he commanded, his voice steady despite the growing tension. "Full combat formation, but maintain distance. All weapons systems on standby, but do not power up targeting arrays." As the Empire's finest warships moved into position around the Eternal Dawn, Thorn studied the dark vessel with growing apprehension. The Arcanian Empire had built its dominion on the principle that superior technology meant superior right to rule. But for the first time in his long career, Thorn found himself wondering if they had finally encountered something that made their technological superiority irrelevant. The mysterious vessel remained motionless, seeming to absorb not just light, but the very concept of detection itself. Traditional scanning beams disappeared into its hull without reflection. Gravitational sensors registered it as a void in spacetime. Even the most basic optical observations seemed to slide off its surface like water off polished glass. "Admiral," Vex's voice cut through his contemplation, "we're detecting a change in the local quantum field." Before Thorn could respond, a voice echoed through the bridge, not through their communication systems, but seemingly from the air itself, as if reality had decided to speak directly to them. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the RSS Shadowcraft." The voice was calm, measured, and spoke perfect Arcanian, despite no known species having decoded their language. "Your empire has expanded far enough. We are here to discuss terms for your peaceful regression to your original territories." Thorn's scales rippled with a mixture of fear and fascination. In all his years of service, no species had ever dared to dictate terms to the Empire. Yet something in that voice, in the casual display of impossible technology, told him this encounter would redefine everything he thought he knew about his civilization's place in the galaxy. The hunt had begun, but for the first time in Imperial history, the Arcanians were not the predators. They were the prey. Impossible silence. Admiral Thorn's third heart began its warning rhythm as Captain Chen's words echoed through the bridge. The implications were staggering. Not only had this unknown species penetrated their most secure communications protocols, they were somehow transmitting directly through space itself. "Impossible," First Officer Vex whispered, her crystalline appendages dimming with shock. "Their ship has no visible communication arrays, no quantum entanglement signatures. No. Yet here we are." Thorn cut her off, his scales shifting to a deeper shade of blue, a sign of intense concentration among his kind. He straightened to his full height, mandibles clicking as he formulated his response. "This is Admiral Mix Thorn of the Arcanian Imperial Fleet. Your presence in Imperial space is a violation of sovereign territory. State your purpose and prepare for inspection." A sound that might have been human laughter filtered through the impossible communication channel. "Admiral, I don't think you understand the situation. We're not here to submit to your authority. We're here to inform you that your expansion stops now." As if to emphasize her words, the shadowcraft began to move. The motion defied everything Thorn knew about spacecraft dynamics. There was no engine flare, no gravitational distortion, no indication of propulsion at all. The vessel simply relocated, appearing instantaneously at different points around the Arcanian fleet. "Tracking systems are unable to compute its trajectory," Vex reported, her voice tight with strain. "It's not just moving fast, Admiral. It's as if it's choosing which points in spacetime it wishes to occupy." Thorn's primary hearts thundered in his chest as he watched the tactical display. The human vessel's movements made no sense. It wasn't flying through space so much as stepping through it, each position change occurring without crossing the distance between points. "Deploy containment field," he ordered, falling back on centuries of military training. "Full spectrum, maximum power. Let's see how they handle being trapped in a quantum cage." The Arcanian fleet responded with practiced precision. 12 of their most powerful warships activated their containment systems simultaneously, generating an interlocking field of quantum barriers that could hold a small moon in place. The energy expenditure was enormous, but Thorn needed answers. The shadowcraft stopped its impossible dance through spacetime, hanging motionless at the center of the containment field. For a moment, Thorn felt a surge of satisfaction. Perhaps their technology wasn't completely useless against these humans after all. Then Captain Chen's voice returned, tinged with what sounded almost like amusement. "Interesting approach, Admiral. Let me show you why it won't work." The shadowcraft's hull began to change. The absolute black surface shifted, patterns emerging that hurt to look at, geometric shapes that seem to fold through dimensions that shouldn't exist. Thorn's inner eyelids closed reflexively as his optical processors struggled to interpret what they were seeing. By the first egg, Vex breathed, her crystalline form refracting with anxiety. "Admiral, the quantum field readings, they're impossible. The ship isn't trying to break through our containment field. It's convincing space itself that the field doesn't exist." Thorn watched in mute fascination as reality seemed to hiccup around the human vessel. The containment field, the most advanced detention technology in the Empire's arsenal, simply ceased to function. Not through force or counteraction, but through what appeared to be a localized rewriting of physical laws. "Your civilization has achieved much, Admiral." Chen's voice carried a note of genuine respect now. "But you are still playing by the universe's rules. Humanity learned to negotiate with them instead." As if to demonstrate this point, the Shadowcraft performed what Thorn's military training insisted was impossible. The vessel's hull began to ripple with patterns of absolute darkness, deeper than the void between stars. Then, without any warning or transition, it existed in multiple places simultaneously, perfect copies of the ship appearing at 12 different points around the Arcanian fleet. Multiple contacts. The sensor officer cried out, their scales pale with fear. "All readings identical. We can't determine which is the original." "That's because they're all original," Chen explained, her voice now coming from 12 different points in space. "We're not creating illusions, Admiral. We're allowing the Shadowcraft to exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously. Think of it as having a polite conversation with probability itself." Thorn's third heart nearly seized as he processed the implications. His civilization had spent millennia mastering the physical laws of the universe, building their empire on their superior understanding of those laws. But these humans, they treated reality itself as something malleable, a set of guidelines to be discussed rather than immutable rules to be followed. "What do you want?" he found himself asking, all pretense of imperial authority forgotten in the face of such casual impossibility. "As I said, we're here to discuss terms," Chen replied, her voice once again emanating from a single point as the multiple Shadowcrafts collapsed back into one. "Humanity has been watching your expansion for some time. We appreciate the technological advancement you've brought to the species you've conquered, but your methods are unnecessarily aggressive." The Shadowcraft's hull shifted again, patterns of darkness flowing across its surface like liquid night. "We're offering you a choice, Admiral. You can either begin a peaceful withdrawal from your conquered territories, helping your subject species transition to independence, or—" She paused, and Thorn felt all three of his hearts skip simultaneously. "We can demonstrate why humanity's approach to physics makes your entire defensive doctrine obsolete." As if to emphasize this point, the Shadowcraft performed one final feat of impossible motion. The vessel seemed to fold through itself, its hull briefly reflecting light from angles that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. When it reappeared, it was inside the Eternal Dawn's primary shield barrier, less than 100 meters from the bridge observation window. Thorn stared at the black vessel hovering impossibly close to his flagship, its hull still rippling with those reality-bending patterns. In that moment, he understood with perfect clarity that his civilization hadn't just encountered a more advanced species, they had met beings who had transcended the very concept of technological limitations. The hunt had taken an unexpected turn, and the galaxy's apex predator had just discovered it was no longer at the top of the food chain. Dance of predators. The silence on the Eternal Dawn's bridge felt heavier than a collapsing star. Admiral Thorn stared at the Shadowcraft through the observation window, its impossible hull seeming to drink in even the faint light from the bridge itself. 3 centuries of military doctrine warred with the evidence before his eyes. "Your demonstration is impressive, Captain Chen," he managed, his scales rippling with carefully controlled fear. "But the Empire does not respond well to threats." "This isn't a threat, Admiral." Chen's voice remained calm. "It's a preview. You've built your civilization's military might on the assumption that physics is a set of immutable laws. We're showing you why that assumption is outdated." Before Thorn could respond, his tactical officer's voice cut through the tension. "Admiral, multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace, detecting quantum signatures consistent with the 7th Battle Fleet." Thorn's primary hearts surged with renewed confidence. He hadn't called for reinforcements, but the Imperial Navy's automated response protocols must have activated when they detected an unknown vessel so close to a command ship. The 7th Fleet was legendary, 30 warships equipped with the Empire's most advanced weapons technology. The space around the Eternal Dawn erupted with light as the reinforcements arrived, their massive forms sliding into reality like predators emerging from deep water. Each vessel was a masterpiece of Imperial engineering, bristling with weapon systems that could reduce a small moon to atoms. "Captain Chen." Thorn's voice carried a new edge of authority. "Your vessel is now surrounded by the finest ships in the Imperial Navy. Whatever technological advantages you possess, they cannot overcome such overwhelming force. Stand down and prepare to be boarded." The response came not in words, but in action. The Shadowcraft's hull began to shift, those mesmerizing patterns of absolute darkness flowing like liquid night. Then, without warning or apparent effort, the human vessel simply ceased to reflect light entirely. "Contact lost," Vex reported, her crystalline form flickering with alarm. "All sensors report null returns. It's as if the ship no longer exists in our reality." "Impossible," Thorn breathed, even as his third heart began its warning rhythm. "Nothing can simply vanish from existence. Launch warning shots. Standard pattern. Full spread." The space around the Shadowcraft's last known position erupted with energy as 43 Imperial warships opened fire simultaneously. Plasma beams and quantum torpedoes filled the void, their combined power enough to shatter a planet's crust. Every single shot passed through empty space. An interesting assumption about existence. "Admiral." Chen's voice returned, now seemingly emanating from everywhere at once. "But you're thinking in binary terms, that something must either exist or not exist. We found the space between those states to be quite useful." The Shadowcraft rippled back into visible reality, but changed. Its hull now seemed to bend light around itself in impossible ways, creating depths and angles that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. As Thorn watched in mounting horror, the vessel began to move. To call it combat would be inaccurate. Combat implied an exchange, a battle between roughly equal forces. What followed was more akin to a dance, one where only one partner knew the steps, and those steps ignored the fundamental laws of physics. The 7th Fleet's gunners were the finest in the Empire, their targeting systems legendary for their accuracy. None of it mattered. The Shadowcraft moved through their barrages as if the energy beams were merely suggestions, its hull shifting between states of reality that made targeting impossible. "Admiral." The tactical officer's voice cracked with strain. "Our weapons, they're passing through the target without effect. It's as if the ship is choosing which parts of reality it wants to interact with." Thorn watched as the pride of the Imperial Navy emptied their weapons into space, their most powerful attacks proving as effective as throwing stones at a ghost. The Shadowcraft's response was even more terrifying. It began to demonstrate why humanity's approach to warfare made conventional defense meaningless. The human vessel danced between the Imperial ships, its hull rippling with those reality-bending patterns. Each time it passed near an Imperial warship, impossible things began to happen. Weapon systems powered down, not through damage, but through what seemed like gentle persuasion. Shield generators decided they'd rather not generate shields anymore. Quantum computers began solving problems no one had asked them to solve. "They're not attacking our ships," Vex whispered, her crystalline form refracting with a mix of fear and awe. They're talking to our technology, convincing it to stop working." The Shadowcraft completed another impossible maneuver, briefly existing in multiple quantum states as it passed through the heart of the Imperial formation. In its wake, 15 of the Empire's finest warships hung powerless in space, their crews unharmed, but their technology rendered inert by weapons that operated on principles beyond Imperial science. "You see, Admiral." Chen's voice carried that same calm tone. Even as she systematically dismantled the most powerful fleet in known space, humanity took a different approach to technological advancement. Instead of building bigger guns or stronger shields, we learned to ask reality itself for cooperation. Your weapons are impressive, but they're still bound by conventional physics. We prefer to treat physical laws more like physical suggestions. As if to demonstrate this point, the Shadowcraft performed what Thorne's tactical training insisted was impossible. The vessel's hull began to emit patterns of pure darkness, deeper than the void between stars. Then, without warning or transition, it phased partially out of normal spacetime, existing simultaneously in multiple dimensional states. The effect on the Imperial fleet was devastating. Weapons fire passed through where the ship should be, emerging on the other side, as if it had traveled through a different reality entirely. Targeting systems crashed as they tried to track a vessel that treated linear time and space as optional guidelines. Thorne watched in mute horror as the Shadowcraft systematically reduced the pride of the Imperial Navy to floating hulks, not through destruction, but through what could only be described as technological persuasion. Each pass of the human vessel left another Imperial ship powerless, its systems not destroyed but simply convinced to stop functioning. As the last of his combat-capable ships fell silent, Thorne finally understood what true technological superiority looked like. The Empire had spent centuries perfecting the art of destruction, while humanity had mastered something far more terrifying: the ability to make destruction itself unnecessary. Breaking point. Admiral Thorne stood motionless on his bridge, surrounded by holographic displays showing the status of his defeated fleet. 43 of the Empire's finest warships hung powerless in space, their crews unharmed but their technology rendered dormant by methods that defied comprehension. The Shadowcraft hovered at the center of this tableau, its hull still rippling with those mesmerizing patterns of absolute darkness. "Your Empire's expansion was impressive." Captain Chen's voice carried through the impossible communication channel. But it was built on a fundamental misconception about the nature of technological progress. Thorne's third heart had settled into a steady warning rhythm as he processed the complete reversal of everything he thought he knew about his civilization's place in the galaxy. "Explain," he managed, his scales shifting to the deep blue of intense focus. The Shadowcraft's hull shifted, geometric patterns emerging that seemed to fold through dimensions that shouldn't exist. "Your species, like many others, followed a linear path of technological development. You discovered atomic energy, mastered quantum mechanics, developed faster than light travel. But you always stayed within the boundaries of what you thought was possible." "And humanity didn't?" Vex asked, her crystalline form refracting with curious patterns despite her fear. "We took a different approach," Chen explained. As if to demonstrate, the Shadowcraft performed another impossible maneuver, briefly existing in multiple states of reality simultaneously. "Instead of accepting the universe's laws as absolute, we learned to treat them as negotiable parameters." Thorne watched as space itself seemed to ripple around the human vessel. "But the fundamental constants, the basic principles of physics, are more flexible than you imagine," Chen finished. "Your civilization built magnificent weapons, Admiral, but you never questioned why energy had to behave according to standard models. You never asked space-time if it might prefer to operate differently in certain circumstances." The implications hit Thorne like a quantum torpedo. His civilization had spent millennia advancing their technology, proud of their mastery over the physical universe. But these humans, they hadn't just advanced technology. They transcended the very concept of technological limitations. "Show me," he found himself saying, all pretense of imperial authority forgotten in the face of such fundamental revelations. The Shadowcraft's response was immediate and impossible. Its hull began to emit patterns that hurt to look at, geometries that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. Then, without warning or transition, reality itself seemed to hiccup around the vessel. Detecting massive quantum field fluctuations, the science officer reported, their scales pale with fear and awe. The human ship it's creating localized regions where our understanding of physics simply doesn't apply. Thorne watched as the shadowcraft demonstrated why humanity's approach to technology made conventional warfare obsolete. The vessel didn't just move through space, it negotiated with space itself, suggesting alternative paths through reality that shouldn't have been possible. Your weapons rely on physics behaving consistently, Chen explained as her ship performed maneuvers that violated every principle of spacecraft dynamics. But we've learned that reality is more flexible than that. Watch. The shadowcraft's next demonstration shattered what remained of Thorne's understanding of technological advancement. The vessel's hull began to emit what looked like waves of pure probability, ripples in the fabric of space-time that made his inner eyelids close reflexively. By the first egg, Vex whispered, her crystalline form flickering with complex patterns of fear and fascination. They're not just manipulating energy or matter. They're rewriting the local properties of space-time itself. Thorne's primary hearts thundered as he watched the human vessel demonstrate capabilities that shouldn't have been possible. The shadowcraft wasn't just advancing technology. It was changing the fundamental rules that governed how technology worked. Your empire expanded through force. Chen's voice carried a note of what might have been sympathy. You encountered new species, demonstrated your superior technology, and demanded their submission. But you never stopped to consider what might happen when you met a civilization that had moved beyond the very concept of technological limitations. As if to emphasize this point, the shadowcraft performed one final feat that defied comprehension. The vessel's hull began to emit patterns of pure darkness, deeper than the void between stars. Then, without warning or transition, it phased partially out of normal spacetime, existing simultaneously in multiple dimensional states. We're not here to destroy your empire, Admiral. Chen continued as Thorne struggled to process what he was seeing. We're here to show you why your current path of expansion is obsolete. Your civilization has achieved much, but you're still thinking in terms of conventional cause and effect. We left those limitations behind centuries ago. Thorne stared at the shadowcraft, its hull still rippling with those reality-bending patterns, and finally understood the true implications of this encounter. His civilization hadn't just met a more advanced species. They had encountered beings who had transcended the very framework of how they understood the universe to work. "What are your terms?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper as the full weight of the situation settled over him like a neutron star's gravity. The shadowcraft's hull shifted one final time, patterns of impossible geometry flowing across its surface. "That, Admiral," Chen replied, "is entirely up to how willing your empire is to learn a new way of thinking about reality itself." Dawn of understanding. In the dimmed light of the Eternal Dawn's conference chamber, Admiral Thorne faced the impossible. Captain Sarah Chen sat across from him, the first human he'd ever seen in physical form. She appeared deceptively ordinary, a bipedal being with smooth skin instead of scales, soft hair instead of crystals. Yet there was something in her eyes that hinted at the same impossible depth he'd seen in her ship's hull. "Your empire stands at a crossroads, Admiral," Chen said, her voice carrying the same calm authority it had during their first contact. "The path you've been following. Expansion through force, technological superiority through domination. It's reached its natural end." Thorne's three hearts beat in an uncertain rhythm as he studied the data crystals spread before them. Each one contained evidence of humanity's presence throughout the galaxy, carefully hidden until now. They had been watching, waiting, assessing. "How long?" he asked, his scales shifting to the deep blue of intense contemplation. "How long have your people been capable of this level of technological manipulation?" Chen's smile carried an edge of something ancient. "We achieved our first breakthrough in quantum reality manipulation about 3 centuries ago. It happened by accident, really. We were trying to develop better stealth technology for our ships when we discovered that reality itself was more negotiable than we'd assumed. Vex, who had been silent until now, leaned forward, her crystalline form refracting with curiosity. But the power requirements for such manipulation, the computational complexity. That's where you're still thinking in conventional terms, Chen explained. You're approaching it as a problem of force. How much energy you need to make reality do what you want. We approached it as a conversation. Instead of trying to overpower physical laws, we learned to persuade them. The holographic display between them shifted, showing images that made Thorn's inner eyelids close reflexively. Human ships phasing through solid matter, vessels existing in multiple quantum states simultaneously, weapons that didn't destroy but simply convinced technology to stop functioning. Your civilization has achieved remarkable things, Chen continued, gesturing to the display. But you've been building on a foundation that assumes the universe's laws are immutable. We discovered they're more like suggestions, guidelines that can be negotiated with if you know the right language. Thorn's third heart steadied as he began to understand. And now you want us to what? Abandon our empire? Surrender our technological advantages? No. Chen's response was immediate and firm. We want you to evolve. To understand that true advancement doesn't come from dominating physical laws, but from learning to work with them. Your empire doesn't need to end. It needs to transform. Thorn's primary hearts thundered as he watched the human vessel demonstrate capabilities that shouldn't have been possible. The Shadowcraft wasn't just advancing technology. It was changing the fundamental rules that governed how technology worked. Your empire expanded through force. Chen's voice carried a note of what might have been sympathy. You encountered new species, demonstrated your superior technology, and demanded their submission. But you never stopped to consider what might happen when you met a civilization that had moved beyond the very concept of technological limitations. As if to emphasize this point, the Shadowcraft performed one final feat that defied comprehension. The vessel's hull began to emit patterns of pure darkness, deeper than the void between stars. Then, without warning or transition, it phased partially out of normal space-time, existing simultaneously in multiple dimensional states. We're not here to destroy your empire, Admiral, Chen continued as Thorn struggled to process what he was seeing. We're here to show you why your current path of expansion is obsolete. Your civilization has achieved much, but you're still thinking in terms of conventional cause and effect. We left those limitations behind centuries ago. Thorn stared at the Shadowcraft, its hull still rippling with those reality-bending patterns, and finally understood the true implications of this encounter. His civilization hadn't just met a more advanced species, they had encountered beings who had transcended the very framework of how they understood the universe to work. What are your terms? He asked, his voice barely a whisper as the full weight of the situation settled over him like a neutron star's gravity. The Shadowcraft's hull shifted one final time, patterns of impossible geometry flowing across its surface. That, Admiral, Chen replied, is entirely up to how willing your empire is to learn a new way of thinking about reality itself. The display shifted again, showing possibilities that made Thorn's scales ripple with wonder. Technologies that worked in harmony with reality instead of trying to force it into submission. Ships that didn't fight against space-time, but asked it politely to accommodate their passage. We're offering to teach you, Chen explained, her eyes reflecting the same impossible depths he'd seen in the Shadowcraft's hull. Not just your military, but your scientists, your philosophers, your civilians. We want to show you why cooperation with reality itself is more powerful than any weapon you could build. Vex's crystalline form pulsed with realization. The species we've conquered, you want us to teach them as well. Exactly, Chen smiled. Your empire has spent centuries spreading technological advancement through force. Imagine what you could achieve by spreading understanding instead. The species under your control don't need to be conquered territories. They could be partners in exploring the true nature of reality. Thorn stood, moving to the observation window. The shadowcraft hung in space beyond, its hull still rippling with those mesmerizing patterns that defied conventional physics. Around it, his fleet's ships floated powerless, not destroyed, but paused, waiting for a new direction. "And if we refuse?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Then we demonstrate why attempting to maintain an empire through force becomes pointless when you encounter a civilization that can negotiate with probability itself." Chen's voice remained calm, but carried an edge of steel. "But that would be wasteful, Admiral. You've built something remarkable. We're offering you the chance to make it revolutionary." Thorne turned back to the conference table, his scales shifting to the iridescent patterns that indicated deep thought among his kind. His civilization had spent millennia believing they were at the pinnacle of technological achievement. Now they were being offered a chance to understand just how limited that view had been. "The Imperial Council will need to be convinced," he said finally. "They've built their power on the assumption of technological superiority." Chen nodded, standing to join him at the window. "Show them this," she said, gesturing to where the shadowcraft hung in space. As they watched, the human vessel began to demonstrate once again why conventional physics was merely a starting point for what was possible. The ship's hull rippled with patterns of pure possibility, existing in multiple quantum states simultaneously. Space itself seemed to bend around it, not through force, but through gentle persuasion. It was beautiful in a way that transcended traditional concepts of aesthetics, a demonstration of what was possible when you stopped trying to force the universe to obey and instead learned to dance with it. "Your empire stands at the dawn of a new understanding," Chen said softly. "You can continue trying to rule reality, or you can learn to partner with it. The choice is yours, but I think you already know which path leads to true advancement." Thorne watched the shadowcraft's display of impossible grace and felt something shift in his understanding of the universe. His civilization hadn't been defeated. They'd been offered an invitation to transcend their own limitations. "When do we begin?" he asked, his hearts finally settling into a steady rhythm of anticipation. Chen's smile carried the weight of centuries of human advancement. "We already have, Admiral. We already have." In the void of space, the shadowcraft continued its dance with reality itself, a testament to what was possible when you stopped trying to conquer the universe and learned instead to ask it for cooperation. The hunt was over, but something far more interesting was just beginning.